Hello everyone and welcome back here to my YouTube channel. If you are new here, my name's Joelle and I am a full-time reseller on several platforms, but Poshmark is my main one. And speaking of Poshmark, today we are going to talk about how to prevent losing a case on Poshmark. And we are first going to talk about how to prevent a case from being opened, and then we are going to talk about if you do have a case opened against you, how to win that case, of course, if you are in the right. So we're just gonna get right into the video, and as promised, we are first going to talk about how to prevent a case from being opened on Poshmark. Now, my first tip is to always include measurements, especially for secondhand items. We have no way of knowing if these secondhand items that we pick up have been washed, worn, shrunken in the dryer, you name it. There are so many little details out there that we just don't know about. And so putting those measurements is very important because sizing isn't always going to be accurate, especially in the women's department where sizing in general is so different amongst so many different brands. Now, Poshmark does not allow items to be returned due to fit. So if it just doesn't fit you, that is not a reason to return. However, how is Poshmark supposed to know the difference between an item being shrunk or not? A buyer could open up a case with something that doesn't fit well and claim that that item has been shrunk. Obviously, you can tell if a fabric has been shrunk, and so I would not recommend listing it or even sourcing it if that is the case. However, putting those measurements is going to ensure that even if the size number or the letter doesn't seem very accurate, those measurements do not lie. Basically, adding those measurements is a nice little safety net to ensure that the buyer is going to be happy with the way an item fits. And if they try to return it due to fit, you have very good evidence to present to Poshmark because you did include those measurements. Furthermore, including measurements in your listings oftentimes takes out the middleman of a potential buyer having to ask questions about fit. If you just go ahead and put those in the listing, doesn't take too long to take them and then add it to your listing. This can prevent just a lot of those extra questions coming from buyers because you might already have them answered in your listing because you added them. My next piece of advice on how to prevent a case from being opened on Poshmark is that you can never be too descriptive. Basically, it's better to have too much in your listing rather than too little. So I said, don't just show pictures of flaws, include a description of it too, or vice versa. I think it's very important to tell people to refer to the photos in your listing, especially if there is a little flaw on the item, and to be as descriptive as possible with what that flaw is. Sometimes buyers don't read the full description or they miss something, and that is not your fault. So basically include every little flaw, even if it's a flaw that people are often used to, such as having a little pin-sized hole maybe in the armpit of an item that you purchased from a thrift store. You still need to include that because that is considered a defect on that item that didn't happen until that store tag was placed there. So overall, just be descriptive as possible. That leads me to my next piece of advice, and that is to double check your listings. It is very easy to mislabel something on your Poshmark listing, such as the size or the color of something, and that is something that can be grounds for opening a return case on Poshmark and something that Poshmark might just accept. So I have seen from a lot of other resellers who have lost cases that even if you have something correct in your description and in your photos, if it is something that is mislabeled on Poshmark's actual settings, you can still be at fault according to Poshmark. I think I see this happen the most with something like sizing. And so if something is a size medium dress, you have a picture of that tag and you have a medium in your description, but on the Poshmark category, it is filtered under a small. That can affect a buyer's shopping experience because if they filter by their size, that dress is going to show up even though it is not their size. So again, that can still be grounds for return on Poshmark. So just make sure to double check your listing once you post it and make sure that there are no errors, and even frequently audit your closet to make sure, again, that there are no errors in your listings. And this will be a big way to prevent a case from being opened on Poshmark. Now that we have talked about how to prevent a case from being opened, we are going to discuss how to handle things in the event that a case is opened against you. So this is stuff that I have gathered from a lot of personal experience with cases being opened, and then also from some Poshmark Facebook groups. I would highly recommend joining these groups, especially if you need advice on cases being open, because you can be in contact with thousands of different sellers who are going to talk about their experiences. And I have found that a lot of their experiences have been very similar with cases being open. So I want to throw in a disclaimer that this advice should only apply if you are truly in the right. So if there is a flaw that you miss, just approve that return. That is not the fault of the buyer, and they are simply just trying to return an order that was not as described. So if you feel like you are truly at fault, offer a partial refund, and if they don't want that, just honor the return, because we don't want to be scammers on this app. This advice applies to people who have had a wrongful case opened against them and they know that their item arrived exactly as described. My first piece of advice is to always address Poshmark. Obviously, you are communicating with the buyer because they are the ones who are messaging with you back and forth. However, make sure to address Poshmark because they do get invited into that conversation, and Poshmark is the ultimate decider in who wins that case. And speaking of addressing Poshmark, ask Poshmark to share their return policy. I say this because a lot of people don't know the return policies. I have seen it be a very innocent thing before where someone is maybe a guest buyer on Poshmark and they want to return something because it doesn't fit, or maybe they ordered a couple of pieces with the intention of returning and they just don't know that return policy and don't look over it. That is something that I'm not going to blame somebody for. However, it is very important to address Poshmark in those situations. Ask them to share their return policy so that the buyer can know exactly what that policy is. And it's coming from Poshmark itself, which can sometimes lessen the blow of being upset about an order that arrived that doesn't fit, because it's coming from Poshmark rather than just some seller that you've never met before. I've had somebody order a fairly expensive dress before and they wanted to return it because it did not fit them right. And I had to address Poshmark and just ask them for their return policy and just let the buyer know that this is what it is. And they were very understanding. I think it was just one of those innocent cases, and they were very happy to hear from Poshmark themselves because it let them know that I am not a scammer myself. They obviously aren't either. It just felt really good for them to hear the news from Poshmark rather than just me. I also have here that you should be concise. Stick to Poshmark's policies only and emphasize your reputation as a seller. Again, only if you are 100% sure that you are right in this situation. Basically, if you are a highly rated seller and a very loyal seller, address Poshmark and just let them know that you are a very highly rated seller, never had complaints about orders arriving not as described. I think this especially applies to any cases being open involving authenticity allegations, or even someone who says that the wrong item arrived when you know exactly what you sent. When it comes to my inventory, I personally check 3 different times for flaws. That is when I source the item, when I photograph it, and then before I package it up. So this is something that I will always let Poshmark know if a case is opened up against me, because clearly if there is a gigantic hole in a dress that somebody claims, it did not come from me. It clearly came some other point, because I check every little detail before shipping that item out. And my final piece of advice is don't take things too personal. Yes, there are scammers out there and they suck and should not be on the platform, but other times this could be a buyer's first experience on Poshmark, and ultimately you don't want to drive them away from the app, because we want to make sure that we are continuing to bring in more buyers, because that means more items on our listings. Even for someone who has bought from Poshmark multiple times, they might not know their return policies. I would guess that if I was only a buyer and not a seller on Poshmark, I probably wouldn't care to look at the return policies. I'd probably just go straight over my head. Sometimes a buyer just needs to be communicated with on what these return policies are. Make sure you are respectful, because again, not everybody is a scammer when they open up a case. Sometimes they are just disappointed with what they got, even if it was as described. Other times they just don't know the return policies, and that is okay. Make sure that you are the seller that respectfully tells them those policies to prevent further cases from being opened for you or other sellers. Also, once a case is opened up against you, taking things too personal can be a really bad look for you. If you start arguing with the person or going back and forth, Poshmark might be a little bit turned off by that. Simply address Poshmark and stick to the policies and your reputation as a top-rated seller. All right, we have now gone over how to prevent a case from being open on Poshmark and how to win a case once it is open. Just to recap, for preventing a case from being opened, always put measurements, be very descriptive, and double check those listings. And as for handling a case once one is opened, always address Poshmark. Ask Poshmark to share their policies on returns. Be concise and don't take things too personal. And if you found anything of value during this YouTube video, I hope that you consider subscribing to my channel and turning those notifications on so you don't miss any of my weekly videos. And as always, I appreciate each and every one of you for supporting my YouTube channel. So now that we're at the end of this video, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you for the next video.